So there are many things to be discussed. In this first one, we are going to mainly focus on critical appraiser of literature. So why it is necessary? I'll just go by this. I'll just go by. Okay. The purpose of this session is just to help you to gain confidence in organizing journal club and to be able to discuss key terms used in applied statistics. Common misconception is that in order to do critical appraisal of literature, one has to be very good in applied statistics. I would say it is a myth. Any one of us can acquire these skills by doing it repeatedly. On 1st January 1986, I joined as a junior agent with Professor M.M. Kapoor. And the journal club was very regular activity. Once I came to this country, sometime in 2005 or 6, I came to know that some of the senior registrars who were fantastic were failing in their final FRCS exam. In their final FRCS exam, they might be fantastic registrars, but if they have not really been convincingly good to the 2 out of 10 examiners in critical appraisal of literature, means academic viva, they are given 2 papers and they are asked to analyze half an hour each, or 2 out of 10 examiners are they ask you questions about applied physiology and critical care, and that is for all the surgical specialties, whether you're endocrine, breast, GI, neuro, or plastic, pediatrics. Everybody has to go through those 4 out of 10 examiners, 2 for critical care, 2 for critical appraisal literature. So there must be some reason about it. Towards the end of the presentation, you'll see why precisely we should really strive to achieve these skills. I can say that if we do it repeatedly, it is not that difficult skill to acquire. Number two, I would say that it is a very underutilized educational instrument. So not just in academic departments of medicine or surgery, anybody whosoever is working in district general hospitals or in private sector should be able to analyze whether I change my practice on the basis of this article or not. I would say that more than 99% of the articles which are published would not change our clinical practice in any specialty. But certainly there is some insight which helps you to gain into that. So all you have to do is just keep 1 or 2 articles in your pocket, and whenever you've got some time for coffee, pick that article and discuss there, preferably at a fixed time. So always keep 2 pens. One is red ink, another is green ink. And if you see anything which from 2 categories, one is the subject wise, number 2 regarding the statistics wise. Anything which you think you could do better, mark it with red. Anything which you are very happy that this article has been published and has done these things well, I'll come to that, what we are talking about. Then you mark it with green, and by the time you have gone through the articles in 20-25 minutes, you are ready with your answers. I'm crazy about cricket, so I'm going to use a few cricketing examples for the simplification of what I'm trying to say. So this is MCG, Melbourne Cricket Ground. In 2015, I, along with my friends, went to, and with my wife Bobby, we went to Australian trip to watch World Cup cricket. So this is the next one is the WACA. Okay, let us see the next line. Then this is Perth Cricket Ground, the WACA Western Australia Cricket Association cricket ground. So now the null hypothesis. When we are playing on WACA, that is the India versus West Indies game. The ball bounce on cricket pitch in MCG is similar to that in WACA. That is null hypothesis. So that's how one would always say that when you're comparing two groups, you go with the hypothesis that they are similar. If you express the same thing in alternate hypothesis, then one would say that the ball bounce on cricket pitch at MCG is lower than that of WACA. How would you go about that? Simple thing, you just do data collection. So this is a slide which shows perhaps the most important feature of any data collection. In MCG, they counted 150 balls, 35 were too high above the shoulder. In WACA, 55 were too high above the shoulder. and the difference between two was 0.01 p-value. Means there is 1% risk, 1% possibility of these two figures to be not really related to a difference in pitch, but it is just due to chance. Means 99% chances it is due to difference in two different pitches. If you collect 10 times more data, and you would get similar findings, for example 350 out of 1500 versus 550 out of 1500, you can see the ratio is similar, but you can see the p-value is so low. It is almost 1 in 100,000, 1 in 1 lakh chances that it is happening due to just by chance, and 99,999 probably it is due to difference in pitch. What does this slide show? It emphasizes the point that the bigger the sample size, more reliable the data is. Sir, is it clear? Can everybody see this clearly?
Yeah, we can
Everybody
see the slides. No issue. Continue.
No issue. Okay, sir. Next is
So
another
we're
point
still-
which I...
Sir, because we do not know if we are proceeding with the presentation, we are still looking at the Melbourne Cricket Ground. Just in case.
Ah, my God. My God, I'm sorry about that.
Now we have got the null hypothesis now slide.
You got the null hypothesis. Okay, I'll change it now. Rather than by the flick of the button, I'll just change like this. So the next slide. Okay.
Number
A moment
7,
ago,
yeah, fine. Number 7, null hypothesis.
and you looked at Waka, then this which ball bounce, then you saw this. You can read that.
Cricket
Can you
ball
read that?
bounce higher than shoulder. Yeah, that's
Yes,
fine.
sir. I can see. Now I'm changing from the left side of the screen. That's why you can see it.
Go ahead.
So the next study which we have done is I'm trying to show what is the type 1 error. The type 1 error, type 2 error in any data. So null hypothesis is that if you wish to take autograph from players, it is equally difficult at both the grounds. And you can see the type of grounds. I'll just show one is MCG, another is Waka. So coming to our hypothesis. So the data was collected from 200 people. 6 out of people, 200 could get the autographs. And at Waka, 22 out of 190 could get the autographs. And we know Waka is only one floor and it is much easier to access the players. And that is the reason. So p-value between these two is 0.001. It might appear as type 1 error because null hypothesis is wrongly rejected here. But it is actually type 3 error because difference is there, but it is due to some other reason other than the ability to take autographs from the players, because the anything other than the way the ground has been prepared, the ground has been constructed. One is multi-storied, another is only single-storied. So it's because of that reason the difference is there. So when we would say that this difference between two groups is there, and that difference is correct, but the reason is something else, then we'll call it type 3 error. We can discuss it some other time. Let's just move on to the next one. Another point which I wish to really make is type 2 error. What is type 2 error? So you can see two different types of grounds there. And null hypothesis, the water intake of the spectators at Waka is similar to those at MCG. How do you do that? So you count it over a period of 4 hours. Each one of the individuals who were watching were consuming 3.21 liters. Compared to at MCG, which was 3.09. So the difference between these two groups is not there. P-value is more than 0.05. So it would be type 2 error because null hypothesis is wrongly accepted. Means there is difference between two groups, but the sample size may be too small. That's what happens in lots of surgical studies. If that, I'll repeat, lots of surgical studies do have type 2 error. In other words, the difference between two groups is there, but the study does not show that difference. Why does it happen? It happens because of either the data size is too small, as in this study, or the scatter of the data, scatter as measured by standard error, standard deviation, scatter of the data is quite a lot. And as a result, one would have type 2 error. So after mentioning about these three types of errors, we move over to the next point which I wish to make. So normally it is we keep it interactive, but today we have already lost some time and we have got only 27 minutes left. So can everybody read this slide, sir? Schools in Northwest. Gaurav Prasamisha, sir. Hello.
Yes, sir, we could read, sir.
You can read it. Okay, now it is working. It seems because I am doing it by the.
Using
I'm
your
doing it by
cursor
the.
and the- yeah.
So you can read that. Schools in northwest of England were randomly allocated into one of the two groups. One group, year 8 students were given practical nutritional training in the school kitchen. Group B, the year 8 students were taught about nutrition in a lecture series. So there is difference between these two. Both these groups spent equal time in either the kitchen or in the lecture theaters. At the end of 6 months, they were given 25 MCQs related to nutrition value of various foods. The performance of both the groups was compared. Now, what are we comparing here? Are we comparing students? Normally, we keep it interactive, which we'll do it next time when we get chance. So I can say that these are not the students who are not randomized. It is the class groups who have been randomized together. So we call them as clusters. Cluster means people living in the same area, people going to one specific hospital, or people attending for thyroid cancer surgery in one department versus another department in another city. So once you are comparing not the patients but the patients as a whole, you will call it cluster. And that's what is this example showing. The example which I showed is that of cluster randomization, means whole patients group or whole study group has been randomized. Either the one class goes one group and the other class goes another group, and there could be multiple of those. These are parallel design. Parallel means the group, when you start all through the study, longitudinal study it is, they stay in the same group. You could have crossover group. We'll explain why what is the advantage of having crossover groups, crossover design rather. And this is a prospective cohort. Cohort means once we start a group of subjects, we follow them up. It could be prospective, from today we start and follow it up. It could be retrospective. We look at the data of 2005 till now. So whosoever joined, whosoever had, for example, parathyroid surgery in 2005, and we take all those patients in that group in a department, for example, SGPGI, and follow them up. So that is a retrospective cohort, but it's a cohort. The next point I wish to highlight is, for example, in phase 3 trial was conducted in Liverpool transplant unit. 184 patients were randomized to two groups. One group was given cyclosporin plus MMF 95, another was given cyclosporin for AZA plus AZA 89. You might wonder why the number of patients is unequal. I kept a thyroid example in it, but I don't know, it didn't save that. I'm having to go by this transplant example. That is wrong. Okay, so coming to why do we have two different, the subjects are different in two groups. So when you are randomizing it, the randomization, whether you do by table or by computer, almost always the number is may not be perfectly similar. And that's what the randomization procedure determines it. If we have got huge number of subjects in both groups, then probably it will be quite similar. So, so what kind of study this is? So this is a trial. We are doing intervention there. It's a prospective trial, and that's what this particular study is. It's a phase 3 trial. We'll discuss some other time what are different phases of drug trials: phase 1, 2, 3, 4. This is phase 3, and it is 1-to-1 randomization, means it's almost one is equal group in each group. It is randomized controlled trial. It's a intervention study. You're doing an intervention rather than just observing, and it's a parallel design, and it's a prospective cohort. That's what we need to describe that. So we have this next example, analysis of factors affecting the outcomes of breast cancer in people who were operated in 1975 to 2005. That's a 30-year period performed in Royal Liverpool Hospital. And that study was done, for example, in 2005. So the study looked at patients who are 40 years or older versus 40 years or younger. The outcome was younger patients had much more aggressive breast cancer disease. So what this study is, it's a retrospective study. Yeah, it's a longitudinal study, not a cross-sectional study. It's a cohort which we looked at. We looked at the cohort of patients who were brought in for operation in this period, and we followed them up. And it's an observational study. The patients had intervention, no doubt, but that intervention was not done for the study itself. It was already happening, and we just happened to be the observers. Then we come to the another example. Large group of GP practices, all the patients developed lung cancer were compared with a group of patients with similar demographics but without lung cancer. So what study this is? I'll say it again. In a GP practice, all those patients who had lung cancer, they were identified versus those who did not have. And the risk factors such as smoking, occupation were compared, and that we go back 10, 20, 30 years ago. So it was found that patients who had lung cancer were 14 times more likely to have 10 years smoking history than controls. So what this study is, it's a longitudinal study, no doubt, but rather than cohort, it's a case control. Case control is always retrospective. Case control cannot be prospective. Case control means you have got the outcome parameter. Outcome parameter here is lung cancer versus those who did not have. You go back and study all those parameters available. But somehow we would not have any idea as to all those patients who, everybody in the society who had been exposed to smoking. So that numerator is just not there. So case control study it is, and in this case control study you measure odds ratio of getting cancer, lung cancer versus those who did not get lung cancer when you are exposed to that risk. When you do prospective study, you talk about the risk ratio. Risk ratio is much more scientific, means you know all those who are exposed, versus odds ratio, you only are seeing those who got the disease versus who did not get the disease in respect to that factor. So odds ratio is often used by people who do betting, whether in today's match in the Delhi team is going to win versus Mumbai's team is going to win in IPL. So there is lots of bookies who are really working on that. Often they are very accurate, actually, I would say, but it is not that scientific. They talk about odds ratio, but proper scientific way of doing it is called risk ratio, when you know all those who are at risk when they are exposed to that risk. So just to mention, although we do not have enough time to discuss that, it takes whole day of that workshop to discuss all those points. But all I'm trying to say is that the things called odds ratio versus relative risk and hazard ratio. Hazard ratio, when you discuss, you are talking about the risk when there's a timeline. When there's timeline, then you calculate the hazard ratio there. So how to read a paper? I'll quickly go through in next 10 minutes. I'm showing this picture of John Ioannidis. John Ioannidis found that, I'll make it slightly bigger. He's a professor from Greece, settled in USA. He found that, can everybody read this? Gaurav, can you read this, what I'm showing? John Ioannidis found that lots of published studies. Okay, thank you. Lots of published studies, they are blighted by many problems. Small sample size, poorly designed protocols, and very lax statistical standards. And as a result, what we get is plethora of unsubstantiated and misleading research. That's what he observed. So I'm going to show next slide, 6 slides, which show the common errors, common deficiencies in any publication. Slide number 22. Flaw number 1, smaller the study in a scientific field, less likely that the results are going to be reliable. I've already shown it from comparing that data from MCG and WACA, the Perth Cricket Ground. that the bigger the sample size, more reliable the data. Number two, smaller the effect size in a scientific field, less likely the research findings are going to be true. What is effect size? I'll give you the example. Like all of us have studied Love and Bailey, and if you read the critical ischemia of limbs, there were many drugs which were used in 1970s, 80s. Well, we deal with diabetic foot hair in our department of endocrine surgery. So patients who had critical ischemia or who had not necessarily critical ischemia, who had peripheral vascular disease, lots of drugs were tried, like nefridofuril, like nicotinic acid or pentoxifylline. And one of the studies on nefridofuril said that, oh, after this trial, the walking distance improves from 150 yards to 250 yards. So all the tests showed, oh yeah, fantastic. It's a fantastic drug. It improves the walking distance from 150 yards to 250 yards. So the treatment effect here is 250 minus 150 is 100 yards. Okay, now statistical test has shown that that treatment effect size is significantly different. But you and me as clinicians know that is that 100 yards, is it really worth meaning anything? So when we look at the treatment effect size, it is a clinician who decides what is a good treatment effect when there is difference between two groups that say, oh yeah, this is really a reliable uh, treatment effect, and we'll agree with that treatment effect size. तो इसमें फिर क्या होता है? What happens is that lots of studies keep smaller treatment effect size, and the results are showing, oh yes, fantastic difference, which is bit of cheating, I would say. So what I'm trying to say is that treatment effect size should be adequate. It should truly reflect effect on patients' outcomes, means quality of life or survival. Then you would say, yes, it is a significant size. It is not something to be decided by a statistician, I'm trying to say. We can discuss it some other time. Flaw number 3, greater number of tested relationship, means at the end of the study, you start doing chopping and doing salami of the data. And then you say, oh yeah, we started with these parameters, but now we have found some more, and there's difference between two groups. So if you keep doing salami and chopping of the data, you keep trying to test as the post hoc analysis, there is a bit of a cheating, I would say, as John Iannardi say. Means when you embark on the study, you calculate the sample size based on what you are really trying to test, relation between two parameters or difference between two parameters in two groups. If after the study has been completed, data has been collected, and then you start changing your plans, that is how you look at the material methods or patients and methods. Have the authors stuck to their original plan of analysis? If not, then that's a deviation from the truth. Number 4, greater the flexibility in designs, definitions, and analytical methods, more likely to be the study findings are going to be true. One test, if that is not working, you try another test, and somehow you find, oh yeah, there is difference or there is a correlation. That is cheating. I don't want 20 years down the line my daughter to say, oh, daddy, what you study, you published this study, there's a bit lot of lie in it. So I don't want 20 years down the line my daughter to come and tell me, oh, you have published a wrong data here or wrong analysis. So that's what I would be determined by. Financial interest, greater the financial interest, less likely the research find is to be true. Having said that, industry have got tremendous role. We need to respect them. Penicillin saved thousands and millions of lives, but penicillin notatum, as discovered by Alexander Fleming, would have remained another antibiotic, but without the support of industry, it wouldn't have saved millions of lives. So there's no doubt, I'm not trying to dismiss the role of industry, but we need to be very clear that there is always a financial interest. And we know that those studies which have had financial support and they are coming out to be true, they are more likely to be published. What are the scientific effects? Scientific field means something which is very common. For example, I'll give you the example of SILS. It is single incision laparoscopic surgery. I think surgery should be simplified. If it is looking complex, you have to really go by using angulated instruments. You're flouting the simple principle of triangulation, making it complex. I think that is not the way to do it. So by doing a study, for example, doing cosmetic parameters, for example, for laparoscopy cholecystectomy, chances of bile duct injury are 1 in 50 to 1 in 300 in laparoscopic, and 1 in 300 to 1 in 600 in open. But in order to show that difference, you need to have many tens of thousands. Just by having 150 or 200 patients, it is not possible. What I'm trying to say is, if a scientific field is becoming very popular, it is quite possible that that article will be published. And because of deviation from the protocols which need to be applied properly, we may not really get to the truth. That's what I'm trying to say. What John Ioannidis initially said that. Said that. So we go to the next one. Why I'm showing this picture, BBC, whether it's Doordarshan or BBC or Z News, within 15 minutes they can tell the whole world news. So I can say that there's no way it is difficult thing to do. Sorry, I'm used two negatives. It is very simple to develop this skill, and at the end of reading a paper, you should be able to make a 2-minute summary. And rather than reading the abstract, just say what the authors have done as per the impression which you have got. So rather than reciting the abstract, you make a 2-minute summary, and then you leave it to the team to ask the questions. And that is something which we need to develop all the time in our departments. First thing I would do is, what is the title? Does it address relevant issues? What is the impact factor of a journal? Sorry, it says old slide. The impact factor of British Journal Surgery is something like 5.8 or 9 now. And define the objectives of study. And that is always there in the last line of introduction or background. When you go to that, you'll get to know what the aims and objectives of that study are. We go to the next slide. Now, in the methods, all the time you keep saying whether the authors are comparing apples with pears, means they are comparing two groups which are comparable. All the time we need to see how the authors are really endeavoring to reduce the bias. You can never eliminate bias. You can only reduce it, keep it bare minimum. How they can have what they have worked on by reducing the effect of confounding factors. What is a confounding factor? Again, normally I would let the audience discuss that or give example, but I'll give a simple example. Two GP practices, you compare patients, in one GP practice, you compare patients who developed coronary artery disease at about, after 10 years of follow-up. And then you reach to the conclusion, oh, patients who were obese were more likely to get coronary artery disease. Okay. Then the data was looked into it again. They found that in that data, those obese patients were much more likely to be smoker in that group. So in that group, although the conclusion was obese patients were more likely to get coronary artery disease after 20 years, but it is the smoking which we know as a stronger risk factor. So because smoking was distributed more in obese group, or in that study, smoking becomes a confounding factor. So what is a confounding factor? It basically is a parameter which affects the relation of outcome parameters and the dependent versus independent factors. It is basically affecting the relation between those two parameters, dependent parameter and independent parameter. So that is a confounding factor. So we need to all the time, how do you eliminate the effect of confounding factor? Either you do the stratified randomization, means if you're comparing two groups, one new drug for asthma versus old drug, two groups. In two groups, the drug which is new is showing better effects. But it could be that in that group, the patient with milder asthma are much more likely. So therefore, you have not chosen the patients correctly. They are not distributed equally in two groups. So you stratify the two groups into mild, moderate, and severe, and they should be equally distributed in two. So this is one way of taking the effect of confounding factors away. Or other is do a regression analysis. We'll come to that some other time. So I have already mentioned that. I need to skip that. In methods, I've got only 7 minutes to complete here. Methods, you look at how many patients were chosen, number of subjects, with a single or multi-central study, inclusion and exclusion criteria, what is sample size, how they have calculated sample size, we'll come to that some other time, and whether the control group is comparable or not. These are things we are looking at. We are looking at the internal validity of a study, means how well the study has been done. Study, the slide which I showed few minutes ago, how well the authors have eliminated, I should say eliminated, minimized the effect of bias and reduce the effect of confounding factors. How well they have done. All those things are combined together and we call them as internal validity. External validity, when we say, is how well that study which has been done, I can extrapolate into my own practice. That is external validity. And we'll come to that, what factors affect that. I don't think we have time to go through this. I'll just move that. There are ways of calculating sample size. Time doesn't allow me to do that, so we'll come to that some other time. But it is very simple. So basically, all I'm trying to say, if you follow this very important point, rarer a disease is, bigger should be the sample size. Okay, rare disease, bigger should be sample size. And I've already alluded to treatment effect. Treatment effect should be clinically significant. The significance level, alpha error, should be smaller the alpha error, bigger the sample size. Similarly, power of the study. And dropout rate you need to keep in mind. Ratio of treatment versus control arm. We'll come to that some other time. I got quite a few key things to show here. So all the time we are seeing how well the study has been conducted, whether the authors have deviated from their own protocols, inclusion and exclusion criteria. That's what you are looking at all the time. So I come to the next one. I've already alluded to external validity, means would it change my practice? That's what the question I'm asking all the time. So we need to classify what kind of study it is. Level 1A is meta-analysis of well-conducted RCT, means well-conducted RCT. 1B is RCTs, and similarly, the if you go down the ladder of the evidence, quality of evidence, level 4 is case reports, and actually level 5 is expert committee. So there are different types of levels of evidence classification, so we'll come to that some other time. I'm showing here this quote from Charak, and I'll show you at once the finish slide show. I carried all through since March 1986, since the time we were given this Charak oath, that not for self, not for the fulfillment of any worldly material desire or gain, but solely for the good of suffering humanity, I'll treat and excel all. Excel all may be interpreted, oh, getting more marks from others. Many people would not believe, but I have never strived to get more marks. I always believed in so that I treat the patient safely. That's what I need to overcome my own errors. How do you overcome your own errors? Keep your data and see how you are comparing with your own practice, what the standard one. This figure shows, or it is too small, it just shows how we develop the acute critical care course. As Professor Mishra sir asked me what all qualities are required in any specialty, ability to identify patients who are getting sick is very crucial. Surgeons are not good in using applied physiology and critical care principles. Orthopedic surgeons, and I would say the gynecologists, are even worse than us. So there's a great need for making sure that we all go through skill development in how you identify sick patients. I go and work in tribal area in Jan Swasthya Sahayog, and I would give the example of this patient safety. It doesn't take more than 10 minutes to pick up a record of any patient in 120 villages adopted by our friends, colleagues there who are conducting this, who have been working in for 21 years in Jan Swasthya Sahayog. And it is so crucial to really have good data recording in order to not just for really getting more papers or getting more prominence in conferences or academic field, just so that we make sure that our patients are managed safely. These are very general principles. We need to have drive, we need to have determination. I call it as 6 Ds: discipline, dedication, direction, and dignity of everyone, each and every individual in a team. Just because somebody is a junior doesn't mean that person is inferior. And that's what we need to really admire and respect the skill set of each and every person in the team. Now, in this presentation, why I'm showing these next three things. In order to achieve excellence, we don't have to look towards the west, that whether it is in medicine, surgery, or anything. There's so much which is already have been happening in our country. You go to Delhi Metro, in my opinion, one of the best in the world. Whether it's launching the satellite around Mars in one shot compared to NASA in 1 in 3, or whether the pilgrimage which I made to in Gujarat, where the Amul, the annual turnover is $2 billion, and not because of government, in spite of governments, it's the public's effort. Last three slides. We have developed three things over last few years, blessings in disguise because of the COVID. We do regular journal club on a monthly basis, 1 hour with our colleagues in India with the surgical oncology. Started with the Department of Surgical Oncology in AIIMS Rishikesh. We call it ACTION. It is academic cooperation and training by interlinking oncology networks, which we are developing. Although started with AIIMS Rishikesh, it's open to anybody. We run monthly journal club with the Urology Society and Transplant Society in India, and we call it ACT, one monthly journal club, and that way we exchange the ideas in a mutually respectful manner. With AIIMS Rishikesh, another thing which we do is trauma network. So I'm a bit crazy about, as a surgeon, one should be able to deal with tumor, trauma, and transplantation. So that's why I'm a bit greedy to have my feet in so many boats. So all I would say is that critical appraisal skills can be easily acquired, and regular journal club is a good modality, underutilized educational instrument. So what we do is it really expresses our priorities. The last slide I like to quote: Amantram Aksharam Nasti means there's no letter in the vocabulary which cannot be turned into a mantra or a formula to a problem. Nasti Moolam Ojam, there's no part of the plant which cannot be turned into medicine. This Ayogya Purusha Nasti, there's no person who is useless. Yojaka hai, tatra durlabh hai. It is rare to find good administrator, good manager, good organizer. It happened in Chanakya's era. It is even our era as well. So what I'm trying to say is that it is very important for us to organize, join hands, and keep learning. This is a fantastic initiative which the faculty of my beloved department in endocrine surgery in HBJ has started, making sure all the trainees who leave the department, they are all the time staying in touch, and we are learning from them and they are learning from us. That's what I'm trying to say. Thank you very much, sir.